It's 2006, New York City, a typical day at the UN General Assembly, where leaders from all over the world cross paths. But away from the spotlight, something historic is unfolding. Ministers from Brazil, Russia, India, and China gather quietly. And while their first meeting may have gone unnoticed by the media, it would set in motion a global shift. This was the birth of BRICS, a coalition that's now threatening to rewrite the rules of the global economy. Could this alliance really challenge the US dollar's dominance and reshape the world order? Or is the whole thing just castles in the air? So what exactly is BRICS? You've probably heard the term before, but let's break it down. BRICS is an acronym that stands for 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Together, these countries make up nearly 45% of the world's population, about 36% of global GDP, and 30% of the world's total land surface. But BRICS isn't just about size, it's about influence. These nations have been working together to shape the global economic and political landscape. As of January 1st of 2024, the group has expanded to include 9 member countries, when Iran, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia also joined the bloc. The acronym stayed the same though, because BRICS-EU doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. The idea behind BRICS actually started with just the term BRIC, and it was coined by a Goldman Sachs economist called Jim O'Neill back in 2001. And at the time, it referred to just the 4 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And these nations were seen as rising economic powers that would soon dominate global growth. Leave it to Goldman Sachs to make an acronym for a major economic power. Fast forward to 2009, and these 4 countries held their first official summit. This was the moment when BRIC, something deeply unserious about saying the moment when a brick did something. But anyways, this was the moment when BRIC went from being just an economic term to an actual alliance, with the goal of formalizing cooperation across a range of areas: economics, politics, and even social issues. In 2010, South Africa was invited to join the group, officially turning BRIC into BRICS. Plural. With South Africa on board, the alliance extended its reach into Africa and added even more weight to the group's global presence. Okay, cool, they made a club. But what's the purpose of BRICS? It's all about collaboration. These nations work together on a range of issues from economics to trade, and even global governance. Their goal is to enhance the influence of emerging economies and challenge the traditional dominance of Western powers in institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. In other words, BRICS is about shifting the balance of power. Instead of a world dominated by a handful of Western countries, BRICS envisions a more multipolar world where emerging economies have a much stronger voice than they do today. To see their vision through, BRICS countries don't just talk. They've created their own institutions, like the BRICS Development Bank, which funds infrastructure and development projects, not only in their own countries, but in other developing nations as well. By the way, when I say developing nations in this context, I don't mean countries like China, Russia, and Brazil, so don't at me in the comments and saying like, yeah, but Brazil is already a developed country, bro, misrepresentation. BRICS isn't just about economics though, it's also about global strategy, political influence, and shaping the future of the world. And as we'll see, they have some pretty big ambitions, including reducing the world's reliance on the US dollar. If you enjoyed the video so far, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps grow the channel, and we're pretty new to this YouTube stuff, so getting some feedback from you really helps. But before we get there, let's get to know the BRICS members a bit more, shall we? First off, we have Brazil, Latin America's largest economy. Brazil's strength lies in its agriculture and natural resources. Think coffee, soybeans, and iron ore. It's a major exporter and a key player in global trade. But like many emerging economies, it faces its own set of challenges, including political instability and economic inequality. Then there's Russia. My comrades from Russia. Known for its vast energy reserves, Russia is one of the top producers of oil and natural gas in the entire world. As you might know, Russia in recent years has been dealing with some pretty heavy economic sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine. Despite this, it remains a central player in BRICS and especially in energy discussions. Next up is India. India's economy is booming, with rapid growth in technology, pharmaceuticals, and services. It's often described as one of the world's fastest growing economies. But this is where things get interesting. India and China, both part of BRICS, have long-standing border disputes and have even had military clashes with sticks in recent years. And this tension definitely complicates their relationship with the rest of the group. Speaking of China, it's the powerhouse of BRICS. China is the world's second largest economy and dominates in manufacturing, technology, and global trade. Its Belt and Road Initiative has extended its influence across the globe. But despite their economic strength, China's relationship with other BRICS members isn't always smooth. In addition to their clashes with India, their global ambitions sometimes raise concerns among its partners, even though China and Russia are, oh my god, like total besties. Finally, there's South Africa, the most industrialized country on the African continent. South Africa is rich in mineral resources like gold, platinum, and diamonds, making it a crucial part of the BRICS alliance. Its inclusion also extends the BRICS influence into Africa, which gives the group a more global reach. I mentioned 4 other countries in the beginning, and their exports are mainly oil, and then gold and coffee, and also some state-sponsored terrorism. Like I said in the beginning, the BRICS countries represent around 45% of the world's population and around 36% of global GDP. That is a massive footprint on the global stage. But despite their shared economic interests, it's important to remember that BRICS isn't always a perfectly united front. We've already seen tensions between India and China, and each country has its own priorities, which sometimes can clash. Just as an example, how do you think countries with strong ties to the West reacted when they found out that Iran was actually being included into BRICS? All of these differences make the BRICS a pretty complex group to manage. On one hand, they all want to reduce Western dominance in global finance and politics, but on the other, internal tensions and competing interests can make cooperation tricky. So while they work together on many fronts like trade and finance, their relationships can be quite delicate. Despite these challenges, BRICS has remained a powerful force on the global stage, and they're now turning their attention to an even bigger goal: reshaping the global financial system by reducing reliance on the US dollar. This process is called de-dollarization, and it's one of the hottest topics surrounding BRICS today. But what exactly does de-dollarization mean? In simple terms, de-dollarization is the process of reducing reliance on the US dollar for global trade, financial transactions, and even as a reserve currency. For decades, the US dollar has been the backbone of the global financial system. Countries use it to trade everything from oil to electronics, and central banks around the world hold dollars as part of their reserves. But some countries, including BRICS members, are now looking to change that. Why, you might ask? Well, one of the key reasons is geopolitics. The dominance of the US dollar gives the United States significant power on the world stage. Countries that find themselves on the wrong side of US foreign policy, like Russia for example, often face economic sanctions that freeze them out of dollar-based transactions. For example, almost all oil is transacted in dollars.
Now that Russia plans to cut oil production in response to Western sanctions.
For these nations, reducing reliance on the dollar isn't just an economic decision, it's a political one. Several BRICS countries, particularly Russia and China, what a surprise, have been vocal about the need to reduce their dependence on the dollar. In fact, both nations have been ramping up trade in their own currency, the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan, instead of using the dollar. And this is part of a broader strategy to weaken the dollar's dominance in global markets. There's even been talk of creating a common BRICS currency as an alternative to the dollar. While this idea is still in the early stages, the mere possibility of a unified BRICS currency shows how serious these countries are about reshaping the global financial system. So what are the key moves the BRICS countries are making towards de-dollarization? First, we have bilateral trade agreements. BRICS countries are increasingly trading in their own currencies, bypassing the need for US dollars altogether. For example, China and Russia are now conducting a significant amount of trade in yuan and rubles, cutting the dollar out of the equation entirely. Next, there's the issue of cross-border payments. Most global financial transactions are processed through SWIFT, which is the global banking system that's based in Belgium. But in response to Western sanctions, Russia and China have started developing alternatives to SWIFT, allowing them to move money between countries without relying on the dollar or the Western-controlled systems. And finally, we have gold. Many BRICS nations have been increasing their gold reserves over the past few years. Gold is often seen as a way to hedge against the US dollar, a sort of insurance policy in case the US dollar loses its global dominance. And by holding more gold, these countries are protecting themselves from potential volatility in the dollar-based financial markets. Altogether, these moves signals that the BRICS is serious about de-dollarization. But there's one big question. Can they really succeed in challenging the US dollar's dominance? It's a tough task, given how deeply the US dollar is embedded into global trade and finance. Still, BRICS efforts to reduce reliance on the dollar are gaining traction, and the world is watching closely to see how far they'll go. One major hurdle to achieving their goals is the internal differences between its members. I've already mentioned the tensions between India and China, and these two countries are both critical members of BRICS, and they have long-standing border disputes that occasionally escalates into military clashes. This complicates their ability to cooperate fully with the group, but the challenges also go deeper than border tensions. India's increasing ties with the West add another layer of complexity. And while Russia and China are focused on countering Western influence, India is carefully strengthening its relationship with Western powers. For example, India has been deepening its defense and economic ties with the United States. In 2020, India signed the BECA Agreement, or Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, with the US, allowing for sharing of geospatial intelligence, which is a major step in defense collaboration. This agreement is part of a broader strategic partnership aimed at countering China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. In 2021, India and the European Union restarted negotiations for a comprehensive trade agreement, with both sides looking to strengthen their economic ties. These partnerships demonstrate that while India is part of BRICS, it's also actively engaging with Western countries to pursue their own strategic interests. Let's turn back to the US dollar for a second. So while de-dollarization has been a key talking point for BRICS, it's no small feat to actually achieve. Because in addition to being deeply embedded into global trade and finance, the trust countries place in it for stability is also massive. Shifting away from the dollar isn't just a technical challenge, it's also about building the same level of confidence in alternative currencies. Another problem? Yeah, BRICS don't have a clear alternative to the dollar yet. While we've heard talk about creating a BRICS currency, the group hasn't come up with a concrete plan or a timeline to make it a reality. And until they do, the idea of challenging the dollar remains largely theoretical. Maybe they should do like El Salvador and just change to Bitcoin. This brings us to the broader criticism of BRICS. While they share a desire to reduce Western influence, their national interests often clash. For example, Brazil and South Africa are more focused on their regional economic concerns and may not be as aggressive in pushing for de-dollarization as, let's say, Russia or China. There's also concerns that BRICS economic goals could create instability in the global financial system. I could imagine some other instability happening as well. For example, the US delivering some freedom to the oil-producing countries of the BRICS. Anyways, some critics worry that without a stable alternative to the dollar, an aggressive push for de-dollarization could disrupt global trade and finance, creating economic turbulence that would affect not just the BRICS members, but the entire world. Great. So what's next for BRICS? With its growing membership and influence, BRICS is positioning itself as a serious contender in the global financial system. And one of the most significant developments on the horizon is the potential impact of expanding the bloc even further. With more members, the BRICS could wield even more powers in key areas like energy, trade, and finance. One of the biggest questions is, how will this affect the global financial system? If BRICS continues to expand their influence, it could push for a broader reform in global institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, challenging the Western-dominated financial order. But how successful could BRICS actually be in shifting global economic power? While there have been some progress in conducting trade in local currencies and developing alternatives to the SWIFT payment system, the US dollar is still the preferred currency for a majority of international transactions. The challenge for BRICS is not only to increase the use of alternative currencies, but also build enough trust in these systems to replace the stability and the liquidity that the dollar offers. To wrap things up, BRICS is no longer just a collection of emerging economies. It's becoming a force that could challenge the status quo. As the bloc grows stronger and more unified, potentially at least, its efforts to reduce reliance on the US dollar are gaining momentum. But whether or not the BRICS can truly reshape the global financial system and dethrone the dollar remains an open question. What do you think? Can BRICS really challenge the dominance of the US dollar and reshape the global economy? Or will the dollar remain the world's go-to currency for years to come? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. By the way, if you want to watch a more in-depth video about China and their economy, click this video and I'll tell you why everything isn't as rosy red as it seems.